Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 1st of July 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UKcolumn News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. I am joined by video Skype link by David Scott from Northern Exposure. And I've just already had a little chat with David, who tells me that the weather in Perth is really sort of cloudy. And we've had a little bit of controversy over reports of the weather. It's always a difficult issue. Some people like a chat about the weather. It's a very British thing to do. Others would rather get on. We'll try and keep it somewhere in the middle. So we're going to say today in Plymouth, there's a bit of blue sky, maybe even a bit of sunshine peeping through, a bit like Britain's political climate. Well, before we bring in David Scott, let's just have a look at a few items that we picked up from the press, and thank you very much to our overseas viewers for pushing this one through. A report, of course, that the Dutch are now starting to say we need to have a referendum as well. And the facts are that a majority of Dutch, according to polls, are saying they would vote in favour of leaving. So 54% of the Dutch in this survey of 27,000 people said that they would like a referendum. And then 48% would vote in favour of leaving. And that is actually a vote in favour of leaving because there were quite a few unknowns or people who wouldn't vote, which meant that the Remain vote would be down around 43%. However, the Prime Minister's having nothing of it. He said this would be very bad for Holland. So obviously, Holland at the moment has a properly European Union regime in power. They don't want any democracy. But we just had to comment on the BBC because, of course, if you Google the Dutch and a referendum, apart from finding very little, the BBC spins their reporting in this way. Dutch anti-immigration politician Geert Wilders said the Netherlands deserved a Nexit vote, while Italy's Northern League says now it's our turn. So as usual, utter bias from the BBC as they twist people against the EU into being those nasty anti-immigration right-wing extremists. Well done, the BBC. Well, we need to be very careful at the moment because, of course, Brexit is an ideal opportunity to bury bad news. And NSBC International here has got an extremely good article all about the privatisation of the Land Registry. This is something that UKcolumn has been watching for some time because we've had some extremely interesting information coming in about corruption, organised corruption within the Land Registry. But the report from NSNBC International here points out that the Land Registry provides vital information, in fact, deals with the ownership of 87% of land worth a total, they say, of 4 trillion, including a trillion in mortgages. Well, of course, we've been getting more and more information out about the sheer fraud and corruption around mortgages. But we're going to reiterate the fact that UKcolumn has been receiving some very interesting, I will say, allegations about ongoing corruption within the Land Registry to steal property. And we will report more on that in due course. Well, let's bring in this man, Michael Gove, the man, of course, who went public to say that he was a Zionist supporter. And we are going to ask who he is. And why are we doing this? Well, if we just remind ourselves of a few things, he was adopted, brought up and educated in Aberdeen. He was a member of the UK government cabinet, which unusually was convened in Aberdeen in February 2014. We're still researching this. If any of our viewers or listeners can actually tell us why the UK cabinet met in Aberdeen, sorry, I'll get there in the end, we would like to know, because reporting in the press, TV at the moment doesn't provide a full explanation. But this is the key bit. All of a sudden, a biography on Michael Gove has been pulled. Just at the critical moment, he puts his name forward as candidate. And we're going to say, why is this? The only answer can be that there is something in that biography that now Mr. Gove does not want known by the general public. So here's one of the candidates, of course, now getting involved in deceit. And let's come on to the BBC. We have Laura Kuenssberg, who has been picked up by other people for what they describe as biased reporting. But we're getting very interested in the power of this BBC top-notch political reporter. And of course, she is crowing that she did a private little interview with Michael Gove. That was pushed out on her Twitter page. And it's fascinating that she was born in Italy of Scottish parents with German grandparents. And she's got family connections in the British government, very good ones. She was also directly implicated in a publicity stunt to undermine the Labour Party. So remarkable that these people are given positions of immense power. And we'll emphasise the point because The Guardian here reported that she turned up in order to challenge and obviously deliberately embarrass Jeremy Corbyn. She was asking which is more important, workers' rights or immigration. There's the immigration thread again, which we mentioned just now. And so with no proper analysis of either subject, it's quite clear that the object of her questions were to create dissent in an already turbulent Labour Party. Just added here that she then was cheeky enough to use her private Twitter account to crow about it, saying Corbyn also mentioned the importance of the press in his speech, just saying. So, David, I'm going to say, who are these people that we've entrusted with the reporting of very, very serious politics in UK?
Well, that's a good question. The issue in Aberdeen is even stranger than the British Cabinet meeting there, because on the same day, the Scottish Cabinet was also meeting in Aberdeenshire. So imagine the good people of Aberdeen. You wait 300 years for a cabinet meeting, and then two come along at once. It must have. There must be some reason that happened. It seemed very surprising. And yes, it's always good to look at the background of those reporting on the press, because you have to remember everyone has an angle, an agenda, and you need to understand what the sort of worldview is in order to be able to judge what is being reported.
Absolutely. So we're going to continue to dig on this subject. When we see reports, we're obviously trying to report what is being said, whether it's in the press or the media, but we're increasingly interested in who the people are who are reporting, what their backgrounds are, and what their connections are. So we better bring in at that stage Oliver Letwin, because we've been saying time and time again that this is the man to watch. This is the real man running government. He's in charge of the Cabinet Office. He's in charge of Brexit. He's in charge of behavioural insights. He's in charge of reservists now in British military. And there's talk about bringing these reservists onto the streets should there be a national emergency. So this man sitting in the background, supposedly former NM Rothschild banker, and undoubtedly this is the man controlling the Tory party with a rod of iron, and certainly controlling anybody who puts their face forward as the Prime Minister. We should also remember that as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, he's heavily involved in the Queen's finances, which would bring him nicely full circle into the banking industry. So whoever it is who becomes the next Prime Minister of Britain, we can rest assured that it will be Oliver Letwin who will be pulling the strings in the background. And I will just add that doesn't give me a lot of confidence. Well, enter Nigel Farage. Now, UKcolumn has watched Mr. Farage for some time. I recently tweeted out credit where it's due, because Nigel Farage gave a really outstanding short talk in the EU Parliament, where, of course, he said, "You're not laughing at me now." And he raised some extremely interesting points. But we're also very interested by this photograph here, which shows Mr. Juncker with his mouth extremely close to Nigel Farage's ear. And the key question, of course, is what did he actually say? Because he's grasping Nigel Farage's head. He seems to be a very touchy-feely gentleman, hand on the shoulder, something being whispered. We would like to know what was said, because it appears to be a very friendly embrace going on between the two of them. David, I'll ask you for your reaction to this one, but the more I've looked at this photograph, the more interested I am.
Well, you have to bear in mind that Juncker seems to be very free with his hands. There's a very disturbing GIF file of him kissing Nicola Sturgeon, and because it's a GIF file, it repeats again and again, and it's really quite distressing. So yes, he does seem to be quite prone to touch people and get up close and personal. I did see the speech that Nigel Farage made to the European Parliament, much heckled by the vast majority in that chamber, but that doesn't make him wrong. They were not laughing.
Okay, well, I was smiling slightly. Somebody in the chat room has said that Mr. Juncker whispered, "I love you," but I can not confirm nor deny that comment. So how are we going to deal with the European Union? Well, of course, Article 50 is being pushed forward at the moment as the solution. But this is a distraction. Where we should be focusing is on this, which is the 1972 European Communities Act. And whilst we are aware of the limitations of petitions, sometimes this process can be helpful. And a petition has been started to quite rightly repeal the 1972 European Communities Act, which would immediately take control of the whole situation. Now, this petition had a very slow start. I had an email yesterday evening to say that it had suddenly taken a bit of a boost, so it's jumped up to 11,626 signatures. In fact, as a result of the Leave vote, this petition should certainly be up in the millions. If we could get the thing fully in front of the public, of course, we should be up at nearly 17 million signing this petition, because this is the weapon to really break the UK away from the European Union. And we'll just remind people to stay up to date with articles on the UK column, Brexit Taking the Broader View, written by David Scott. Over to you, David.
Yes, this is an analysis of what's happening here, and looking at the waning of American power, and noting that the European Union was very much an American venture, every bit as much as it was a Central European one, and that this was an extension of American soft power, and its breakup is evidence that that power is very much on the wane. We have a country which is mired in debt, has huge military overstretch, is wretchedly led, and the soft power has gone, and that will be followed by the hard power. And as these major transitions happen, we tend to enter periods of crisis and difficulty. So that's my view as to one of the broader underlying motivating powers that's driving this situation forward, as well as the more obvious issues of UK sovereignty and the role of the EU in making our laws for us.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, of course, there is no doubt that Scotland is having a very important part to play in all of the political manoeuvring around the EU. Money is at the back of everything, so take us through Contra Corner here.
Well, it's just something that David Stockton was always worth a read, and I would encourage people to look out this article. He's correctly seeing that getting out of the EU is a huge economic opportunity for Great Britain, that we want to get away from an economy based on bubble finance and into an economy based on real trade, and real trade with the whole world. And that's the opportunity. The concern is, of course, that our wise overlords in Parliament may not have the wisdom and ability to seize that opportunity, but that's what we should be looking to do.
Yeah, follow the money stands good through the centuries, I think. Well, I have to say, as an Englishman, I am fascinated with Nicola Sturgeon and her ability, it seems, to lead the Scottish nation.
Well, as a Scot, I think you should keep her. The efforts by Nicola Sturgeon this week have been very, very strange. There's been an obvious attempt to ramp up a public clamour amongst the nationalist supporting part of the Scottish population, which is about 45% of the Scottish population, you'll recall, in order to generate a move for a new independence referendum on the back of the Brexit vote. Now, there's no evidence that this is wanted by the Scottish population as a whole, and there's certainly huge uncertainty over what it would mean. Anywhere you look is uncertain, legally uncertain. What the negotiations would involve is uncertain. What the monetary system, etc., is all uncertain. But not having any facts has not been a barrier to racking up the anticipation amongst our supporters that this is going to lead to another independence referendum.
Right, okay, and we've got the cabinet meeting here. I noticed the lady centre has got a pretty good tartan on there. Presumably that's to show.
That's your favourite member of the Scottish cabinet, Brian. That's Angela Constance. I remember you making.
Ah, yes, the lady by the door.
Yes, comments that I couldn't repeat, but they were certainly heartfelt on your behalf.
No, I think she was just trying to drum up business for Scotland. That's all it was. But she's got the tartan on. What you
said more or less. That wasn't quite. You'd added a couple of words there. Yes, that's the cabinet, or some of it, the Scottish cabinet, and I must admit it doesn't inspire a great deal of confidence. The lady on the left gave a speech during the Brexit referendum from Falkirk Town Hall during the count, when it became clear that Britain had voted to leave the EU, and the speech was along the lines of how dare the English not consider the wishes of the Scottish people, and that seemed to me, to put it mildly, to miss the point of the whole exercise and have a very narrow and exclusive view of what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah. David, can I ask, has the Scottish Cabinet shown any interest in understanding why, was it 38% who wanted leave in the Scottish vote? Of course, they're never mentioned, but what has the Cabinet done to try and engage with people who voted leave in Scotland?
The Cabinet has done nothing. The government has done nothing. There was a debate in Parliament, and when one of the MSPs, one of the small number of MSPs who supported leaving the EU, reminded everybody in that Parliament that nearly 40% of Scots had voted to leave, and that wasn't reflected in Parliament, and that these people, these Scottish people, their view was not being represented. They were basically shouted down by angry nationalist MSPs who claimed that these people were not in any way representative of Scotland. So those of us who genuinely love liberty and see the EU as an enormous barrier to liberty, and those of us who voted for more perhaps economic reasons, such as the fishermen of the North East, to leave the EU and reclaim our lives in that regard, are being ignored by the Scottish Parliament by and large.
And certainly we've got a similar situation, of course, south of the border. 17 million people don't exist as far as the government's concerned now. But of course, Nicola Sturgeon not getting it all her own way, and she's been told off, I think, by the big boys in Brussels.
Yes, she announced a grand tour of Brussels, a sort of regal progression around the fleshpots of Brussels to speak to everyone in authority there and start the negotiating for some sort of deal. I mean, we've no idea what it could possibly be. And a lot of them would pointed out that actually she had no right to do any of this, that Scotland is not a member of the EU, United Kingdom is, and that all the contact must come via that route. So it seemed to be a very over-hasty move on her part to get the red eye to Brussels within a week of the Brexit vote and try to run around talking to people. There didn't seem to be much diplomacy having been carried out before this visit was initiated.
Right. Well, I didn't mention it when earlier we put up the article on the call for a referendum in Holland, but within that article, the Dutch foreign minister was saying, well, Britain needs to get out of the EU as fast as possible. What I see developing at the moment is that, of course, Britain has rather become the tar baby. We are a pack of trouble. We pose a threat to the European Union, whereas before they were working as hard as possible to pull us in closer. Now, of course, anybody that touches Britain is at risk of bringing the sticky tar into the EU. And I wonder whether Nicola Sturgeon is also tarred with that.
Well, her position is extremely strange and quite incoherent. I mean, not only is she ignoring 38% of the Scottish people who voted in the referendum, that was 1 million people. The number of people who voted to stay part of the EU was 2 million people. She's ignoring them. And she's trying to run around claiming that she represents some sort of settled will of the Scottish people and has a mandate, which she does not have, to negotiate something separately for Scotland. Whereas her legal position is extremely weak and is really dependent upon the favour of the government in London. And to a lesser extent the favour of the government in Brussels. So she seems to have the first of those, but certainly not the second. But there's no sign of a strategy here. There's no sign of anything that's approaching statesmanship or stateswomanship. What we're seeing is very short-term thinking and very much a knee-jerk reaction. It's all very fevered, and there's no feel of having a steady hand on the tiller, I'm afraid.
Right. And what else we're seeing happen as the political turbulence of Brexit unfolds is we're getting these very powerful social organisations coming in, I think, to swing opinion. But you've picked on this one, which is change.org, which is calling for Nicola Sturgeon to stand down. Who's pulling the political strings on this one?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there was a somewhat tongue-in-cheek post from a Scottish Conservative MSP saying that this is terrible. Please don't sign this petition. Here's the link, so he's having a bit of fun with it. But there is at least a bit of a kickback here because Nicola Sturgeon is not taking into account the whole nation. So there's going to be quite a lot of people who are not happy with her performance here. And that's where something beyond a narrow party political, narrow nationalist, grievance-led approach is required, and I don't think she's capable of it.
Right, okay, so very quickly on this one, you've got Kenny here, Kenny in hot water for backing Scotland. And I think we've also got, well, I'll bring it up at the same time because it just shows the turmoil going on. We've got Kenny in hot water. We've also got fury over IRA bombers' Holyrood visit. It's getting mucky.
Yes. Now, the first one, Enda Kenny, is, of course, with Nicola Sturgeon, the two political leaders who are in a position to do something about the Docherty case. The Dochertys were resident in Enda Kenny's constituency in the Republic of Ireland, so we're talking to him as the constituency TD, and Nicola, as the head of state in Scotland, or the head of the Parliament in Scotland, was being appealed to by the Dochertys for assistance. And these people they know one another, and Nicola Sturgeon chaired the British-Irish Council only a few weeks ago, with Enda Kenny sitting there right beside her. But these people are not helping a family in distress. The case with the former convicted IRA terrorist, who's now a TD, there's been a photograph within the last few days of her having a very close one-to-one chat with Nicola Sturgeon. This woman was convicted for life. She got life for her role in the Brighton bombing. So this was an attempt to assassinate a head of state, clearly anti-democratic in the most grievous way, But Nicola Sturgeon seems to have no problem, and the SNP administration, no problem with interacting with her.
Just to interject there, Dave, this is Martina Anderson, is the lady's name for our listeners.
Yes, Martina Anderson, and that's yes. So she was released under the early release program in Ulster, but she had been convicted and sentenced to life. So
the government meets former terrorists, but the general public who dares disagree with the government are labelled domestic terrorists. It's a very confusing situation, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Okay, well, let's move on to the favourite subject of politics today, which of course is death. And we were intrigued by this. It was sent through to the UKcolumn. It's actually a photograph of a plaque on a wall for the Royal British Legion, Devon and Cornwall Area Office. And the person said there's something very unpleasant about the style of this plaque. I feel it adopts an almost cartoon approach, and it's based on blood red and black. I didn't get a good feeling from it, and I wonder whether it follows in from the use of poppies to produce rivers of blood. This, of course, was one of the shots of poppies or blood spewing out of the Tower of London. We've seen it from churches. And I'm just going to say to people, this is nasty stuff, but we need to understand it. You might like to have a read of my article on chocolate and death, which is on the UKcolumn website, which is pointing out that our respective political parties, our government, seems to have an unnatural interest in death. Where does that leave us?
So the River of Blood installation continues its UK tour, and it's just been installed actually in Perth at Balhousie Castle, which is the regimental museum of the Black Watch Regiment.
Right. Okay, well, from death we better go to ashes, and this is an ongoing and very extraordinary story in Scotland about the disappearance of the ashes of babies who've been cremated. But we can rest assured that the government has got this under control because, of course, Eilish Angelini has been investigating.
Yes, a woman with a penchant for secrecy and asking the wrong questions at the right time has been put in charge of this investigation. She has produced a very large report, 420-page report, which is there. Yes, people who have a bit of time, who are willing to go and look at that. I think there's actually quite a lot that would come out of an analysis of that report. There's quite a lot of information in there. The background to this goes back to 2012. We had a journalist, Leslie Winton, was a freelance journalist. She was engaged by a charity in Lothian to write a book about, it's a bereavement charity, so it was writing a book about dealing with bereavement. And her research threw up a very unusual situation that parents who'd lost children, young children, who had them cremated at the local privately owned crematorium, in fact, 2 privately owned crematoria in the area, would get their babies' ashes. But parents who went to the government-run crematorium, which was called Morton Hall, they would not. They were told that no ashes were available because you didn't get ashes from cremating a very young infant. So that started the process of investigating what exactly was happening here, and this threw up what has been a scandal that's affected most of the government-owned crematoria in Scotland, and has been going on for years.
Right. I'll just add to that. We have very good factual information, of course, about various scams run around crematoria, including coffins, of course, which are never burnt. They're used again. That's one scam that goes on. But something very, very dark here. And of course, the questions that were never asked is were these children even cremated, or were their bodies used for body parts? I'm just going to move us on with a little bit of an eye on the clock, David. So we've got children being cremated. There's something strange going on. We're now seeing major cracks in the Scottish child abuse investigation.
Major cracks, to put it mildly, yes. The Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry formed a panel of 3 people. So it's not a large panel, and this was to head up the investigation. So far, now this was announced in October 2014, as I recall. So we're well along the line here. It took almost 6 months to even come into existence, and it's not been doing very much since. It hasn't really started any proper inquiries. No evidence has been taken yet. And one of the 3 panels, a very eminent professor called Lamb from the University of Cambridge, has in fact resigned, and his letter of resignation makes it quite clear as to why he's resigned. Perhaps you could you read out maybe the 3rd paragraph of that, Brian? That would be quite handy if you can.
This could be quite challenging for me. I'm going to, well, Mike's got it. Okay, sorry, we've got it up on screen now. Here we are. It's become increasingly clear over the last 9 months that the panel cannot act independently, and that the Scottish Government intends to continue interfering in ways large and small, directly and indirectly. And he goes on to say, repeated threats to the inquiry's independence have undermined the panel's freedom to address the terms of reference and have doomed the inquiry before the first witness has been heard. That's a pretty brave and upfront statement, isn't it?
It would be hard to imagine a man in his position actually using language any stronger than that. He feels he can't go on. He's pointed very directly at the Scottish Government as the primary cause of this. We're hearing that pressure from the Roman Catholic Church may also be part of this story, because they obviously have, with schools and residential homes and things, there's very much an element of abuse by clergy within the broader picture in Scotland. And the response from the Scottish Government has been, we don't agree with what he's saying, the inquiry goes on, everything's fine. This is surely untenable as a position. How can the victims and survivors have any confidence in this process now?
Yeah. Well, David, I tweeted out before the news started that we need to continue on the trail of money and the abuse of children if we're really to understand the criminal governments that we've got north and south of the border. We're now starting to see them for what they are, because, of course, they have to keep a lid on the child abuse. They have to, otherwise the whole stack of cards comes down. Now, the Brian and Janice Docherty case that you travelled to Ireland to interview the mum and dad has already started to have a phenomenal impact on people. I've had emails, some of the emails, I've never had ones quite like it before, but people utterly horrified at listening to the testimony of this young couple who say, all we did is try to report a man who tried to buy our son, and they have been viciously hounded not only by the Scottish state but by the Irish state as well, Southern Ireland, and of course Westminster is in there with Theresa May as well. With an eye on the clock, take us through this. This is the UKcolumn article, which leads through to the actual detail on Brian and Janice. And we can tell our viewers and listeners today that we're now starting an open source investigation into what happened with this couple. And if you go on the UKcolumn website, you'll be able to access information. You're going to tell us more, I hope, David. We've got an email address here, dochertyinvestigation@ukcolumn.org. What else can we do but get the public to investigate the horrors that have happened to this couple?
Well, quite. I mean, we've now got all 10 episodes of the initial interview up on the website, on that the UKcolumn website that you first showed there, so people can hear the whole thing. Now, what that does is it's Brian and Janice Docherty's story very much in their own words. It names names, it's got times, it's got places, it's got events, it's got a huge amount. It's over 5 hours of audio. There's a vast amount of information. So what we need to do start asking questions and to explore what has actually happened here, is we need people to work together, and that's why we want to run an open source investigation here. Brian and Janice Docherty themselves have been trying to fight this alone for 2 years. It's not enough. Even Ian's asking questions morning, noon and night, they're not getting anywhere. And we need more support and more people on this than any organisation such as the UKcolumn can provide within its own bounds. So that's why it should be an open source. So people who are concerned, people who listen to these tapes and think, well, I've got a question about that. Why did that government department act in that way? Please start asking questions. Send the questions in to that email address. Send the answers in to the email address. We'll collate what comes in and we'll broadcast it on the news.
Okay, and we just add to that we are going to be ruthless in refusing material, anything that has been initiated by people using abusive language, being in any way threatening or intimidating. We are not going to deal with that material. What we do want to deal with is where people have shown that they've put in reasonable, polite, extremely well considered questions to the various authorities, and of course the responses back from those authorities. We also have to deal in evidence. It's no good people producing hearsay or theories on what's taking place. What will make this open source investigation work is the fact that everybody is dealing in factual evidence which has been obtained by lawful means using a polite and reasonable approach. Now, David, you recently called the police to emailed the police to ask a couple of questions. Just take us through this and the response to give people an indication as to what they can expect.
Yeah, so this went to the press department at Aberdeen Police. Now, what we discovered was the name of the individual that the Dochertys allege was the paedophile who offered them £25,000 for access to their son was the same name as a former police officer operating at the very same police station that the Dochertys reported this crime to. He was then subsequently in CID at the next nearest police station, Peterhead, and then subsequent to that he seems to have left the force. This seemed a very strange coincidence because it's a small area, there's not that many people there, and the name was the same. And we managed to identify a man on social media who was tweeting out a fair amount of information about police matters, investigations and such like. And was also in contact with a young girl, and the young girl was incredibly, bizarrely, but accurately shown in the electoral roll as living in the very cottage that the Dochertys vacated. So our question to Police Scotland was, the man that was alleged to have been made this approach by the Docherty family, is he the same man as this person who was a former police officer in the area, in Fraserburgh? So that's what we asked. And the response we got back was, shall we say, brief. It says, I have tried to call you, but there is no substance to the claims below. Now, that struck me as a strange response, as of course I hadn't made any claims. I'd simply asked, was the person reported by Brian Docherty the same person as a former police officer? So I hadn't made any claims, I'd simply asked a question. So I've gone back and I've said that this response is unintelligible, because that's what it is. It doesn't answer the question. I can't make head nor tail of it. Now, I received a phone call from Police Scotland to say that it's definitely not, categorically not a serving police officer. Not a police officer. They didn't use the word serving, they said not a police officer. I tried to ask them questions about what it was and who the person was that had been reported, and they said, well, they knew nothing about the person that had been reported. But they could tell me categorically it wasn't a police officer. I then subsequently went back, and at that point they basically hung up the phone, didn't want to talk about it at all. I went back and asked them, is it possible that it was a former police officer, and could you please put a response in writing? So far, I've not had a response.
Right, okay, and of course we have to stress that this is in relation to allegations made. This is very, very important that these are in relation to allegations made. Well, I'm going to move on through to Melanie Shaw very quickly to say, against this backdrop of the persecution of this family, and we've had many other cases of this going on with the British state. Melanie Shaw, still in prison. We understand there's some form of court proceeding on Monday, but it's not clear what it is. And probably she's only going to be allowed to speak by video link from her cell. She's been segregated. She is being treated well in this prison in general, although she's segregated. But we have no idea what is in store for Melanie. And of course, she is desperately upset at the moment because she doesn't know what is happening to her son, an action that she has recently taken, which we will say appears to have not been the best action she could have taken. But of course, what was in her mind, what is happening to her son. So child abuse survivor, very brave whistleblower, speaks out in Britain. And what does the British state do? They take her child. And when we've got Brian and Janice Docherty, who speak out about an approach for their child, they have all their children taken. Obviously a coincidence, but this is exactly the state presumably we should trust to run the named person scheme, David.
The opposition is continuing. This is a report here from the campaign blog site showing the latest action day in Stornoway, which received an extremely enthusiastic response from the local people who are appalled at what's being proposed for them, don't want it. Like the vast majority of people in Scotland, they don't want it, they don't need it. We do not require universal state surveillance of family life, which is exactly what it is. But much as though the opposition is doing a great deal of harm to the named person scheme, even more disastrous is in fact the people who support it. Because they're showing their true colours. They're showing what the scheme's really about. This next item here is an article by Colin Turbett. Now, he's a former social worker, and he's defending named person. He's saying we need a huge increase in resources to make this work. But that it will indeed work, and it will be fine. Because this is all part of the radical agenda, and by radical he means, of course, communism. And he cites a communist leader, a Russian Bolshevik feminist called Alexandra Kollontai, beg your pardon. Now, she argued that the state had to take over the upbringing of children, and he was quoting this woman in support of the named person scheme. Let me give you a quick quote from what this feminist Bolshevik said in the 1920s. She said, "In Soviet Russia, the commissars of public education and social welfare are already doing much to assist the family. We already have homes for very small babies, creches, kindergartens, children's colonies and homes, hospitals and health resorts for sick children, restaurants, free lunches at school, and free distribution of textbooks, warm clothing and shoes to school children. All this goes to show that the responsibility for the child is passing from the family to the collective." And what we're seeing in Scotland is entirely consistent with that approach. It is communism, it's communitarianism, and it is the destruction of the family and the destruction of the individual.
And the state is proving that when they can get their hands on children, of course, they're not to be trusted. This is pretty creepy. We've got a dentist here recruited into the army of SNP's state snoopers. I get a picture.
We had taxi drivers, and it seems only reasonable that if the taxi driver's spying on you, that as a dentist looks down your throat, that they're taking notes for the government as well. And so it would seem.
Wasn't it Marathon Man with the with the dentist incident. I may have the wrong film, but
No, you've got the right film.
Yeah.
It's yes, that didn't do a great deal for the dentistry profession, I suspect, but perhaps it's more appropriate now than before.
Okay, well, the good news is that good people are starting to speak out. Is that right?
Yes, more and more people are going public. This is a senior councillor in Highland. Now, Highland's been held up as the exemplar of how wonderful this system is. He's standing up and he's saying it's an unacceptable intrusion into family life. So that's a man at the very heart of the system saying, no, we don't want this, we don't need it, it's wrong. So we're seeing more and more brave people. Now, he's an independent councillor, that might well be part of why he can do this. There's no political machine there. But we're seeing more and more brave people stand up and saying no.
Right. And what about this one, a point of contact about parents not for them?
And another excellent article from Maggie Mellon. Now, she's a person politically of the left. It just shows you that it's not all social workers that are with a left-wing viewpoint feel that they have to control the family. Many are much wiser than that. And this is Maggie Mellon pointing out the fact that the claim is it's a single point of contact. Now, that's not even true in its own regards because of the fact that there's many of them. But it's a point of contact about the family, not for them. So anybody in the state, anybody in society at large who has anything to report can report this to the named person who will commence an investigation into the family. It's not there just to help the family, it's there to supervise the family.
Okay, David, well, I know you had a little bit of other material, but I'm going to say I think we're there at the end of today's news. Thank you very much for giving us that update. And you've said to us several times that you think the situation north of the border is a sort of little look for the future for those of us who are south of the border. It seems to me...
We are the testing ground, Brian. We are the testing ground. Yes.
You are the testing ground. Okay, thank you very much for taking us through that. Well, I'll end on the note of Brian and Janice Docherty. As David mentioned, all of the 10 interview segments are now up. If you go onto the UKcolumn website, you can call those up and listen to them. And if you listen to all 10, and I'm sure once you start, you will listen to those 10, we now know what the situation is within Britain and how the state is covering up for the abuse of children. Therefore, we can trust these politicians on absolutely nothing they say, whether it's to do with money, the economy, jobs, or Europe. This is an extremely serious situation. How do we deal with it? Well, let's start by bringing together those 17 million people who had enough common sense to work out that the European Union was dangerous. And let's get these people working in a professional and peaceful way to expose the criminals that we now have running our countries. That brings us to the end of today's UKcolumn news. Thank you very much for all those people who've been supporting us with subscriptions and donations. If you haven't yet joined us with a subscription or made a donation, please would you consider doing so, because we can only do what we do with your help. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time on Monday. Bye-bye.